Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all so much for coming. It's been a busy semester, and it's really sunny out, so thank you for taking the time to join our final public program of the semester. It's a huge honor to coordinate this year's Benjamin C. Howland Memorial Symposium. Thank you to Ben's family for their continued support and engagement, and a special thanks to Jane for being here and continuing to come. And for attending all of them. I also wanted to thank the landscape faculty and students from across the school for contributing work related to this year's theme, which you see cycling behind me, as well as the 3 tireless and brilliant student collaborators who helped put this year's event together. Sachita Pradhan, Sammy Hubbard, and Julia McNally. At every turn, they made the lift lighter and the program better. Thank you so much. Finally, thanks to Brad for allowing/requiring me to take on the Howland this year. It's been a great challenge. One quick logistical note, this lecture is eligible for landscape architecture continuing education credits, and there's a sign-up sheet with Dana at the back after the lecture. Ben Howland joined the UVA Department of Landscape Architecture as faculty in 1975, the same year our department was founded, after 30 years spent working on large public landscapes for the National Park Service. His time with the Park Service and his time teaching at UVA have grounded our program's ambitions within the realm of public service, issues and areas of public concern, and the creation of meaningful, lasting, and beautiful public spaces. In the last 50 years, in a way that I like to believe Ben Howland would have enthusiastically engaged, our field's notion of our most pressing commitments to public spaces and public problems has evolved. Increasingly, landscape architecture and its allied fields have engaged large dynamic material systems that are in continuous motion, driven by wind, water, climate change, and often insatiable markets. The design fields excel at characterizing and imagining how to intervene within spatial, social, and material relationships that are difficult to see, that frequently operate across geopolitical boundaries, and that are often in a continual process of transformation. In these contexts, we strive not only to see how things are, but to imagine how they could be, and to argue through our work that working within dynamic landscapes should not foreclose the possibility of imagining and projecting futures which, just as they did 50 years ago, prioritize inclusive, just, safe, and beautiful public spaces. We'll have 2 speakers tonight. Jane Hutton is dealing with an emergent family situation and wasn't able to join us, but she has been such an important colleague and source of inspiration to many of us. We're thinking of her as she navigates this next week. And for those of you who aren't graduating this year, please know that Brad is already working on the fall schedule to see when she can come. But let me briefly introduce Danica and Ozair. Danica Cooper, our first speaker, will be sharing very recent work on the trans-Mediterranean movement of dust from the Sahara Desert, linking these particulate journeys to the politics and risks of other Mediterranean crossings. Danica is well known to many of us in the School of Architecture through her gorgeous drawings, recently published in the Journal of Landscape Architecture under the title of How to Draw a Dust Storm, where she noted, "When we try to understand the complexities and implications of dust storms, the particle and the storm must be contemplated together." Looking at the shifting morphology of dust as it moves, settles, and accumulates, Cooper reminds us that drawing is not merely representation, but a systematic search, a generative and iterative practice in which things that seem general and vague are made precise, compelling, and engageable. In her writing, she has applied a similar lens onto deserts as a landscape type, revealing them to be rich, resonant, and resilient spaces, full of life and landscape lessons. Most recently, in an essay for JAE, Danica explores the ways in which dry lands hold some of our most necessary lessons for future landscape practices in increasingly arid regions. She brings both her research and creative practice into her teaching at Berkeley, where she is an associate professor of landscape architecture and environmental planning, and where she teaches a graduate studio on resilient arid landscapes and a course that I would love to take called Representation as Research. Let me in. Our second speaker, Ozer Saligi, will be talking about the local, regional, and interstellar geographies implicated by gold mining in South Africa. Over the last 2 decades, in an astoundingly rich range of ways, Ozer has worked on politically contested landscapes and the material practices and design possibilities that attend them. There are too many projects and positions to reasonably enumerate, so I'll mention just a few recent ones. His Johannesburg studio, Deep Dust, The Killing Dark, which was taught in 2020, won the studio prize from architect, from Architect Magazine, and looked at the spatial politics inherent in Johannesburg's extractive landscapes, prompting students to imagine design tools for post-apartheid and post-extraction futures. He explored drawing as a tool for realizing alternative futures as well in his 2022 essay, Drawing an Argument for Refusal, in the AD special issue, Architectures of Refusal, which he co-edited with Jill Stoner. Also in 2022, he co-authored with Emily Deruchot-Turgeon and Zoe Todd a chapter for An Anthropogenic Table of Elements, published with the University of Toronto Press. In this chapter, Ozer, Zoe, and Emily situate oil within a set of human-animal-earth relations and ask, in this context, how we might, quote, protect the future from the present. Ozer is an associate professor of architecture at Carleton University in Ottawa, where he also co-directs the Urban Research Lab, is cross-appointed faculty at the Institute for African Studies, and is affiliate faculty at the Center for the Study of Islam. Ozer, Danica, and Jane are inspirational to me and many of us in the field because they explicitly do not shy away from the inherently contested and political nature of working in the constructed environment. But at the same time, they refuse to relinquish their creative, speculative, and imaginative practices. And in fact, they continue to leverage them in novel forms of inquiry, producing curious, rigorous, and beautiful work. Please join me in welcoming Danica and Ozer.
Yeah, thank you so much for including me. I'm really excited to be here for lots of professional and personal reasons, and especially to get time to talk to Ozer, which I always really relish. Okay, so I'm just going to start by saying that the work that I'm going to share with you today was produced on contested ground, as most of the work that we do is. The University of California, Berkeley sits on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary homelands of the Chochenyo Ohlone Nation. And so my responsibilities to that history are really resonant in the work that I do. One, to acknowledge that like my role as a faculty member is kind of dependent on that violent history. And that as a landscape architect, where my medium is land, I kind of am responsible for thinking about what my kind of future position of that history might be. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is about thinking through questions of land rematriation and what it means to give land back to communities that have been disenfranchised or dispossessed. Okay, so today I'm going to share with you really, really new work, so bear with me. It's still being developed. I also just want to preface by saying that there are a lot of really tough images in this presentation from journalists who have really put themselves in really precarious situations. And so, yeah, I just want to kind of say that there are really kind of tense images that I'm going to show about these flows of materials and people moving across the Mediterranean Sea. So this is a story about dust at its core, and how it can be a way to think about the legacies of colonialism and how those linger in our present. And I'm going to share this story kind of in three parts. The first is really about the sea. It's a story about people who board boats at the ports of Libya and Tunisia in northern Africa and sail across the Mediterranean in hopes of reaching the shores of Malta and southern Italy and in southern Spain. And their hope is often to escape or to remove themselves from financial hardship, violence, food insecurity. And they are often kind of imagining that Europe will offer these opportunities for relief from those particular conditions. They board overcrowded skiffs that are sometimes made of wood, sometimes made of fiberglass, but increasingly are made of inflatable rubber, like the image I'm showing you here. These boats attempt to successfully make a really dangerous 3-day journey across the Mediterranean. And by dangerous, what I mean is the sea itself is really unpredictable and dangerous, but also kind of intensifying that is the unseaworthiness of these boats. They're overloaded. They almost never have navigational tools or instruments aboard them. They're often overcrowded with people, a lack of life jackets, fuel, food, and very often no water. Last year alone, it was reported that 3,000 people either died or went missing during this 3-day journey. And that number is already over 500 this year, so we can predict that we are likely to exceed that number. Since 2014, that total is over 30,000 people. It's assumed that those numbers are lower than the reality, largely because many of these boats are traveling without any documentation and are sometimes just simply unrecorded when there's a shipwreck. Between 2013 and 2014, the Italian government operated a naval and air task force to address this crossing. And it's believed that the operation in just its 1 year of existence was responsible for saving 100,000 people's lives. In 2015, it was canceled, largely because the EU believed that by providing this kind of safety or security in the crossing, that it was encouraging people to take this route and that it was kind of presenting a less dangerous journey for people trying to immigrate to Europe. And so instead, the EU invested in partnering with the Libyan government. Since 2015, they've been largely responsible for funding the Libyan Coast Guard. They've received $450 million from the EU since for the last about decade. And it's believed that Italy is largely responsible for coordinating and enabling the Libyan response at sea, so that they're really orchestrating what's happening in the Mediterranean. And so many people who are activists, who are looking at these relationships, are making the connection that the Libyan Coast Guard is actually an extension of the Italian Navy. So in exchange for the EU funding and training that Italy provides to the Libyan Coast Guard, the Coast Guard is expected to intercept boats and return them to Libya, even when that interception is happening in international waters. The Libyan Coast Guard is notoriously brutal in how they treat people that they encounter. Lots of stories of migrants being beaten, sexually abused, dehumanized. And so the relationship on the water is one of immense precarity for these people. Once the Coast Guard returns these people to Libya, they're often placed in migration detention centers, where they face more abuse, rape, assault, and sometimes they're even sold into labor camps. So the Libyan Coast Guard is, because of this, really believed to be a kind of proxy force for the European Union, aimed to prevent migrants from entering the Schengen territory. And in this way, the EU is really outsourcing its human rights violations. So in some ways, These colonial power dynamics are reproduced in the present moment through the relationship between Italy and Libya, the Libyan Coast Guard in particular. The migration story that we often hear in Western media really focuses on the Mediterranean. It kind of places the Mediterranean Sea at the center of this story, and represents often the African continent as a kind of a homogeneous landscape with a group of people that can be seen as just kind of one group of people. This version of the story really starts at the coast and ends with either a successful entry into Europe or something darker like these shipwrecks and deportation policies. But that's only one part of the story, especially for people that are migrating. The full story really begins much before reaching the port and getting on a skiff. The second part of the story is really about the desert. So in 2022, it was believed that there were over 500,000 immigrants in Libya, most of whom were living in Libya mostly to collect enough money to then pay to get on one of these boats to make their way to Europe. Of those people, nearly 40% of them originate from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. So that's a regional, political, and economic union of 15 African countries that you see in green. It kind of functions like the European Union in the sense that free passage is allowed between these countries. So if you have a passport from any one of these countries, you can move across borders seamlessly and without a visa. And so people are moving through these desert landscapes to get to the Libyan ports. But ECOWAS passports are denied entry at the border of Libya. And so to cross the border into Libya from this other territory, people often hire smugglers. So this process really involves huge sums of money and immense risk to personal safety. The average cost that a migrant spends to cross into Libya and then get to a port is between $600 and $650, which is an enormous amount of financial risk that migrants are taking. The pay-as-you-go method that most smugglers are using really exploits the kind of vulnerability and desperation of the people who are looking to get to these port locations. Smugglers drive migrants in pickup trucks for usually about 3 days across the Saharan desert. The trucks sometimes are carrying between 20 and 25 people in their cargo beds. And this kind of informal route really poses the highest risk to people along this journey to Europe, mainly because it involves immense risk of violence, a lack of food and water, and a lot of vehicular accidents that happen in the process of moving across this really intense landscape. When a truck breaks down or there's an accident, migrants are often forced to walk. During the day, average high temperatures can reach over 100 degrees, and at night they can get as low as 24 degrees. And so the kind of intensity of the environment creates major health risks and a real sense of precarity for people who are moving through this landscape. And so they're kind of forced to encounter the environment in a way that doesn't provide a lot of security for them. But the Sahara is more than just the origin point of how people are moving or where they're coming from. It's also a really geopolitically fraught geography with complex dynamics at play socially, but also politically and environmentally. It's really rich in oil, in gas, in gold, and uranium. And so it's currently really suffering the consequences of human-induced climate change. It's the site of really dangerous and violent insurgencies and terror groups that are aimed at kind of keeping those resources intact and the extractive processes kind of at the forefront. In Italy, along with a lot of European powers, have a major interest in the Sahara. They control it through money and political influence. So Eni, which is Italy's energy firm, operates in the Sahara in partnership with Libya's state oil company. And so Italy has a kind of profound effect on the environmental changes that are occurring in this landscape. So the kind of human-induced climate change that's occurring because of extractive processes are producing climate refugees, and those are the same people that are often attempting to get to Europe. And so there's this very direct relationship between Libya and Italy, where Italy is closing its borders to migrants, but also actively producing an environment that forces people to want to move across the landscape. Eni also works very closely with militia groups to ensure that oil fields are operating and are unhindered by any kind of political instability, of which there's much in Libya right now. And so Italy's interest in Libya is kind of twofold. One is to keep people out of Europe, and two is to keep the kind of neo-colonial relationship that it has with the desert really intact. In both of these cases, Italy outsources its dirty work in order to extract the most benefits and be kind of unencumbered by any kind of human rights violation critique that comes from anywhere outside of Italy. But the Sahara is not just the site of the story, it's really also a character in the story. Within the desert, there's this kind of continual play of high and low pressure areas that create gusts of wind, which lift dust particles into the air and then transport them across the globe. And so as this hot, dry continental air mixes with the cooler, wetter air of the Mediterranean, the wind is kind of carried across southern Europe and moves huge amounts of dust across the landscape. And this is not particular or novel to the Sahara. Dust is kind of moving all across the world all the time. In this map, I'm showing you how global regions of the world are connected by dust. So here you're only seeing land and water that are indistinguishable, but are connected through global territories that are linked by dust movements. And this is kind of pertinent because global annual dust emissions have increased by almost 25% between the late 19th century and today. And largely that is because of human-induced climate change and also land use change over these really dry landscapes. The Sahara is currently the largest dry desert, but it is also the world's largest source of aeolian dust. And so it's producing a lot of material that's moving across the globe. Records indicate that the past century has seen a really dramatic increase in particular in Saharan dust transport. And so the particular matter that's collected during Saharan dust events show really peaks belonging to a group of clay minerals, which we see all across the globe. We see them in Europe, we see them in the American Southwest, we see them in South America. So if we return to this map, you can see that the wind systems are labeled. They're labeled with the names of winds that are given to the people of each of these regions. These winds are moving dust around the landscape, but they're also deeply embedded in the kind of cultural imagination of the people who live in these landscapes. I'm focusing today on the Sirocco winds, which are the Mediterranean winds that come from the Sahara and can reach hurricane speeds in North Africa and then travel to southern Europe. Siroccos arise from warm, dry tropical air masses that are pulled northward by low pressure cells moving eastward across the Mediterranean, with the wind originating in the site of where these people are coming from. The Sirocco causes dusty, dry conditions along the North African coast, storms in the Mediterranean, and then warm, wet weather in southern Europe. Sirocco winds are personified in many early references of Western European mythology and writing. Sirocco winds are called notos in Greek and auster in Roman mythology. Auster is believed to bring rain, and as a result, many of the stories of Auster are that he's being followed by ops with farm tools, really linking rain and agriculture and speaking to a kind of ethos about what that landscape should be producing. Sirocco winds lift particles from the Sahara, carry them over the Mediterranean where they pick up moisture, and this results in rainfall in the southern part of Italy. This phenomenon of Sirocco winds bringing dust particles and dropping them on the landscape is called blood rain. And it's due to the kind of reddish hue or the red kind of ominous sky that it creates when it's moving across southern Italy. When it falls to the ground, it blankets the landscape with kind of red drops. And there have been numerous recorded cases of this phenomenon throughout history. Up until the 17th century, it was believed that this rain was actually blood, and that its occurrence was considered to be a deeply bad omen for a society. So in the Iliad, Homer describes Zeus, who's the god of weather, discovering that his son will soon be killed in the Trojan War. And Homer writes about bloody raindrops and describes Zeus as weeping tears of blood that fall to the ground. Centuries later, Livy, a Roman historian, writes that blood rain was an omen of imminent human suffering. For me, I think this really resonates. The dust becomes a kind of a haunting presence in the landscape, or a material manifestation of this kind of environmental process that's visualized and unavoidable when it blankets the Italian landscape. And when Livy describes this human suffering, I think in today's context, we might use that as a reminder of the violence that migrants face when they are trying to come to this landscape. And I think it also speaks to kind of broader ecological and environmental crises at play that are influencing the way that social processes are unfolding. So human-induced climate change caused by things like Italy's investment in oil and gas are producing climate refugees that are then contributing to the human suffering of those same people when they attempt to migrate across the Mediterranean. And so the dust and blood rain show us that the legacies of colonialism still exist and they still kind of haunt our present. Italian policy to curb migration has subjected migrants to forced labor, kidnapping, extortion, rape, torture, and indefinite extra-legal detention in overcrowded and inhumane centers. And it's believed that much of the trafficking routes that people are moving through in North Africa trace old slave routes. And so there's this very, very clear and direct connection between trafficking today and trafficking in the 18th and 19th century. In 2017, a CNN investigative report showed footage of 12 migrants from Niger being auctioned from a migrant detention center in Libya. And in this incident is kind of an ugly reminder that European policies risk trapping migrants in slave-like conditions, and that are reproducing a kind of condition that I think a lot of European media would like us to believe is no longer happening. And so the dust renders visible these relationships and processes, which are often made invisible by flows of power and flows of money, and puts kind of in stark relationship the connection between legacies of colonialism, extraction, migration, and environmental process. So right now, two students of mine were working on a series of drawings that are attempting to explore the ways that these relationships can really be exposed. This is an early diagram in which that exploration is really starting, where we're trying to link the sea with the desert and all of the kind of complexities of the geopolitics of linking those two places. One thing that we're doing is we're trying to kind of reconceive what a map of this region might look like, and explore these dynamics in what we're calling intact and unraveling, where the intact is the kind of neo-colonial relationship exerted by European powers, and their kind of desire to hold intact their structures of power through oil and gas, and also a process that's unfolding where Europe is unable to kind of control the movement or settlement of dust upon its landscape. And so the map quilt really started with this drawing that locates reported migrant shipwrecks since 2014, and we use those points as the kind of anchors to create a new grid, which kind of grounds the map in people and materials on the move. It intentionally pixelates the landscape and tries to kind of eliminate normative methods of mapping, which tend to make the landscape really smooth and continuous. I'm showing you here a collage that isn't the actual drawing or the quilt, but is a way of experimenting with how that new grid can kind of reframe the way that we think about movement of people and material. So our palette for the quilt, which is still in production, is aerial imagery that's printed on bleached cotton and then dyed with sand particles. And then it's seamed together along those new grid lines. This is kind of a test of that process. We're also using mylar blankets that are given and distributed during rescue missions on the Mediterranean, and we're sewing that into the imagery to kind of bring a tactileness to the way that we're reading this geography, to kind of eliminate the like I said, the kind of flatness or smoothness of drawing the landscape as something that's really regulated or regular. And so I'm just going to end here because the like I said, the drawing is not done. But I will just say in conclusion, the impetus of this project is really to show how dust can be a kind of discursive tool to think about the really complex relationships between the desert and all of these other landscapes, and show how social processes are intrinsically linked to these environmental flows that are happening across the globe. Thanks.
So thank you so much for the invitation to be here, to Aaron, to the Howland Endowment, and thank you to all the students and faculty and staff that made this possible. It's really wonderful to be with you, here today. This is going to be a little weird, and so I'm working through a new project. And so what you're going to see today, most of which is a little raw and maybe a little fresh. But really grateful to have some time with you to maybe workshop this project that I'm calling Laterite Landscapes, but today is very ponderously pitched as, my God, it's full of stars / Earth, an incomplete theory of particulate worlds, also in 3 parts too. So wonderful to have that. I'd like to kind of just start things off with a little framing for us to keep on simmer, maybe during the duration of my talk, and to do that really with Heather Davis's text 8 years ago now, titled "The Land and Water and Air That We Are." I think I do that. Yeah, there we go. Some thoughts on COP21. And so with the background of the protests in Paris in 2016, she writes, "Every time we breathe, we pull the world into our bodies, water vapor and oxygen and carbon and particulate matter and aerosols. We become the outside through our breath, our food, and our porous skin. We are composed of what surrounds us. We have come into existence with and because of so many others, from carbon to microbes to dogs, and all these creatures and rocks and air molecules and water all exist together with each other, for each other. To be a human means to be the land and the water and the air of our surroundings. We are the outside." And so from that, some abbreviated extractions, from that paragraph. We pull the world into our bodies. We are composed of what surrounds us. We have come into existence with and because of so many others, from carbon to microbes to dogs. And this is really just to emphasize, if you will, the entanglement of worlds, of bodies, of matter and existence, which is, of course, a world of entanglement of social, cultural, and political relations, as Danica just reminded us. This is an associated ecology. And so with that as a kind of setup, maybe what I'd like to do with the first stage, called Particulate Positions, is maybe just to set the stage for where this project is rooted in, which includes, as some of you might know, my familial connection to this land, but also because of the geologic reality of this particular terrain, which is inseparable, absolutely, from its political context. And so a core notion of this project for me is, as Danica just reminded us, is that particulates are political, as Jay Owens also reminds us in her new book on dust. And so with this image of a mine overburdened pile in the background by one of South Africa's most important photographers, Santu Mofokeng, and our extractions maybe from Heather Davis, will go to Joburg. And so Johannesburg, as no doubt you all know, is built on gold, mostly gold, but also diamonds and dust. The city rests in and on what's known as the Witwatersrand Basin, the ridge of white waters, known locally as the Rand. It's about a, forgive the metric, it's about a 60-kilometer long scarp that's also in a way a continental divide. So northern waters drain to the Indian Ocean, southern waters drain to the Atlantic. And that morphology, that kind of riverine morphology and geomorphology, is a really significant part of South Africa's geomorphology writ large. But it's also not just a kind of divide, it's a threshold, if you will, a quote unquote golden spike, separating the surface of the city and all of its urban stuff, people and commerce and buildings, above a ground over which an incredible auric and diamantine, world of reefs and seams and veins still exist and are mined. And so the city on this divide, as you know, was and still is at the site of another divide, one of, as vast and as bitterly enduring as its geological one. And so the discovery of diamonds and gold more than half a century before the Afrikaner National Party established what they called their, quote, policy of good neighborliness, which is what apartheid was known as, irrevocably marked the physical geography of the city, and maybe even more so than the physical infrastructure, so roads and buildings. The legacies of colonial extraction, actually, that defined Joburg, were in a way, that still define Joburg, I should say, were in a way the kind of precursive logotype or archetype for the apartheid city. So mining dormitories and hostels for primarily African laborers who dug in the killing dark with pickaxes and hammers, a bureaucratic and very highly ordered system of passbooks and papers to regulate and identify miners and their families, where they lived, while also used to limit their access to what was called Igoli, which is the isiZulu name for Johannesburg, which means literally city of gold. The text here below kind of talks about how international mining processes provided massive investment in northern suburbs. So mining capital invested in northern suburbs and disinvestment in southern areas where miners were located, where mines were, where segregated communities were also kind of, set to live. And all of this, of course, in the context of the prevailing winds, which are north to south. And you can see the kind of golden line of the scarp, the northern communities gated, usually white. I was born at Park Lane Clinic in that circle and lived in Lenasia, which was named after British Colonel Lenz, as a kind of another barrier between Soweto, the southwestern townships, and Joburg proper. And so both the kind of physical and infrastructural systems and processes of, like drew apartheid's map. So its plan, its planimetric design, its districts and neighborhoods and zones, but also its vertical reality. So you can see how mining dumps, are kind of interspersed and pocketed with infrastructural roads like the M2 highway, which weaves through all of this landscape. And so the city's physical and non-physical processes of like deep extraction and colonial capitalism resulted in constant migrations and movements, what the South African writer, architect, scholar Lindsay Bremner described as, quote, people moving between the fragments of their lives, end quote, in her incredible text, Border Skin, which is in an edited volume by Michael Sorkin. So water seeps from the ground to earth in a kind of vertical relationship. Minerals and contaminants leach from rock and from mining machines in like lateral movements and vertical movements. Miners move from daylight to underlands. Money and capital move from transnational corporations to holding companies and banks and deposit boxes and so on. And with the prevailing winds, this movement is aerosolized. And as we see, it moves from north to south, depositing windborne tailings, dust particles and other nano ingestants onto and into the communities that live south of the scarp. And so this next section is titled Particulate Tools. And really, keeping the city white was the paramount tool of apartheid. And that's why all of the kind of processes at play. And so miners and laborers, as we saw earlier, were forced to live and were settled and resettled in southern areas near mines with the kind of constant swirl of mine dust into mouths and lungs, onto clothes. And so particles of quartz and sedimentary rock are a kind of constant aerosolized drape over a people and community who have to live and work in the kind of swirls and vortices of this kind of weaponized landscape. And all of this away from the very leafy, green, and shaded suburbs of northern neighborhoods. And so Johannesburg is built on diamonds and gold and dust, and in a way, the city is a kind of analog for a larger landscape of extraction, is made of earth and is made of stars. So diamonds from the deep pressure of the earth and the crush of the earth, and gold, which, as you know, I'm sure, is an interstellar material born from supernova, from dying stars, and sent to Earth, a kind of extraterrestrial geology. And so if you have diamond earrings, you're actually wearing time and pressure and gravity. And if you have a gold necklace, you have a star, a dead star at your throat, which is an incredible, for me, was just unbelievable as a way to kind of think about these particles. And David Goldblatt, another brilliant photographer, in his book On the Mind, documents through his images, which are another form of tool, if you will, the experience of African laborers working in the Kimberley mine. Another kind of photographer, the James Webb Telescope, taking images of a dying star as a kind of tool. And so the tools and mediums of claiming diamonds and gold have changed over the years in some ways, but have also been like stubbornly the same for a long time. We still use shovels and pans. We still use rope lines and buckets to kind of claim and take these terrestrial and extraterrestrial worlds. And we use tools to see and identify those worlds too, a kind of precursor, if you will, to actually the claim itself, like actually the James Webb Telescope, which is coated in beryllium. So the gold, the goldish yellow that you see is beryllium, which is also actually an interstellar material born out there when cosmic rays hulked out like the heavier stuff in interstellar dust. And so we take particles from out there, we turn them into tools, and then we use those tools to see time and creation unfolding so that we can then claim it. And beryllium, incidentally, which I learned, is actually classified by the U.S. Department of Defense as a strategic and critical material of interest to the United States, which if you inhale too much, beryllium, you get CBD, chronic beryllium disease. So the stars can literally beautify your neck, but they can also kill you. And here are some of the tools, as materials, as method, as process, and ideas, the associated ecology that I mentioned earlier, that was part of the studio that Aaron introduced. And this was actually part of project 2 of the course, which was loosely based on Theo Dutinger's Handbook of Tyranny, and basically asked students to identify sort of collectively and to draw with specifications how the kind of instrumental ecosystem of this landscape might operate through both tools as physical things, but through tools as epistemological, tools as well. And so here's just a few that are highlighted to give you a sense of what those are, from usual things like bulldozers and haulers and trucks and buckets and so on, but also to things like trade shows and slogans like, quote, "A diamond is forever," to work permits and passbooks, to logos and mining and petroleum policies, or even to people like the Rand Lords, as they were called, which more correctly might be Star Lords and Earth Lords, if we kind of continue with our terrestrial and extraterrestrial analogy. The moniker given to those captains of industry and those titans of empire and mining magnates who essentially came to control South African gold and diamonds, and then actually for much of the world itself. And so these are just some of the student drawings from the tool atlas, which and identified in Shannon's, which is up at the top. You can see a kind of series of 4 mugshots of only four landlords. Circled in red is Cecil Rhodes, who, in my estimation, is one of the worst human beings to ever have lived. To things like logos for the FNB Bank, to the South African currency, to a wallet, to mining machines, to Pantone Color 1837, which is not commercially available and has been copyrighted by Tiffany. So you're not allowed to use that color. I don't know why Trevor Noah was selected as the scale figure for all of the tools, but he was. And so you sort of see him next to a bulldozer and next to a ball mill and so on. But, the idea again here being is that there's an associated world, an associated ecology, and that tools are, as we know, not neutral. And so with this kind of last part before the home stretch, I'll just maybe speak to particulate terrains about where things are now at the moment with this project. And so we mentioned briefly a couple of slides back Cecil Rhodes, who first set foot in South Africa from Britain for, quote, health reasons, buying and selling diamond claims at Kimberley before founding with Charles Rudd and a number of others the De Beers Mining Company in 1880. He was elected to Parliament in Cape Town in 81, I think. And then a few years later, gold was discovered on the Transvaal, now known as Gauteng, where the Scarp is and where Johannesburg is. Shortly after that, he becomes Prime Minister of the Cape Colony. And as you know, no doubt, he's one of the great imperialists of our time. He colonized Zimbabwe. He established what came to be known as Zambia as a British protectorate, which was administered through a kind of colonial process under a company called the British South African Company. Next, on the left, there's a drawing by Jerome Babe from 1872, so right around the time that Rose was in South Africa, showing the kind of infrastructural tool of access. These are all the roads and highways that lead to diamond fields. And on the engraving by Sanborn on the right, by George Lindley Sanborn, Edward Lindley Sanborn, shows Cecil Rhodes as the Colossus of Rhodes, astride the African continent, right? One foot is in Cairo, the other foot is in Cape Town. As you can see, he carries a telegraph pole or a telegraph wire connecting Cape to Cairo, which was one of his great desires, and also to paint essentially that strip of Africa pink or red on a map. He also, named Zimbabwe and Zambia Rhodesia after himself when he conquered it, and so no shortage of ego. But the idea with the Colossus of Rhodes obviously is that he's connecting the continent. He's bringing civilization and wealth via tools like the telegram and the rail, which we actually know very well here also with John Gast and his American Progress, painted in 1872, when Cecil Rhodes was actually buying and selling diamond claims at Kimberley, but on the dark continent, the so-called dark continent. This is what Kimberley looked like as a landscape during the diamond rush, the initial diamond rush. And this is very relatively recently after the discovery of diamonds. And so this is a kind of transformation of landscape at geologic speed. And that transformation included all of the attendant structure of architecture and urban exclusion. So a police force, all white, with dogs, summary executions and imprisonments, the conscription of indigenous labor to mine this kind of incredibly unstable terrain, living in highly policed dormitories, complete with local newspapers announcing, arrests and fines and claims and so on. The elevated platforms are, in a way, a kind of 19th century version of the M2 highway that runs through Joburg and its overburdened piles. And from the lines that haul up the earth, that's what you're seeing as a way to kind of pull earth out of the ground with buckets attached to them that were eventually attached to horse whims, as you can see in the top right. The ground slowly destabilized, but what we see in this kind of incredible entanglement of the human and the more than human is a kind of wholesale transformation of a landscape, certainly internally to South Africa, but as mining capital, as particulate kind of moves to wealthy enclaves and so on, but also globally as that capital moves away from Africa and into the world writ large. And so now what I'm trying to do is to really reckon with the legacy of these particulate politics and their tools. And so De Beers, founded by Rudd and Rhodes and a number of others, eventually saw, I think, more than 90% of the world's diamond trade go through that company. An interesting fact, De Beers is the largest shareholder of Anglo-American, and Anglo-American is the largest shareholder of De Beers. So money can move in sneaky ways. But De Beers in the 2000s proposed the diamond route, an initiative by the company that they described to kind of rewild, preserve, and manage 500,000 acres of conservation land through South Africa. And so with 8 nature sites, as they're described on the website, which is changing quite often, and their commitment to a program that they've titled, quote, "Building Forever," end quote. So just like a diamond is forever. The diamond route declares that the natural world, that it is inspired by the natural world from the very start. The diamond route is inspired by the natural world from the very start, which was not the case when Cecil Rhodes was buying mine claims, and that De Beers has been managing nature reserves for the past 120 years. And so there's no mention, in a way, of the political, historical, or socio-cultural implications of the mining terrain. I'm skeptical about many things in life, but really skeptical about neutral corporate speak, especially in conditions like this. And so there's a weird collage. Super weird collage that tries to sum up some of the thoughts, maybe, of this particulate theorizing, the colossal scale of particles and personalities from the hollow earth, hence Godzilla, maybe King Kong, to continental infrastructure, to maybe not institutional gold or greenwashing, with all of their attendant spatial politics. There's Cecil Rhodes in a very famous photograph reclining on the felt. Reclining certainly, but Rhodes also must fall, and he did, in an incredibly ironic way, at least to me. So he retired to a little cottage that he bought in False Bay in Cape Town. If anyone's been, it's beautiful in Muizenberg. It's an absolutely spectacular landscape, and he chose it because of access, ironically, to fresh air, because of a lifelong condition that affected his heart and his lungs. And so Ilse Wolff writes about this in the AD issue on Architectures of Refusal, but he spent his final weeks of life basically in the front bedroom of his cottage with an oxygen cylinder by his bed, and requested that his aides, quote, "knock a hole in the wall in the bedroom opposite the window to allow a through breeze," end quote, because he couldn't breathe. And so he said this after, in 1896, a few years before he died. This is after his brutal conquest of Rhodesia. He basically said of the Shona and the Matebe people that, quote, "I have taken everything from them but the air." So this is the scope of this kind of weird project, kind of particles to lungs and bodies, to De Beers headquarters in Kimberley, to Snap Lake Mine in northern Canada, to the De Beers headquarters in London, to their Ginza building in Tokyo, to the Antwerp Diamond District, to the Big Hole in Kimberley, which is what that looks like now, to the Hollow Earth in an engraving by Athanasius Kircher, who, fun fact, if you know anything about Athanasius Kircher, had his Cabinet of Curiosity in the Collegio Romano in Rome, which is the same building that Galileo had his telescope in, just above, to back out to the stars and to the interstellar world. And so a couple more slides and then I'm done. Is that okay? That's time? Okay, great. The South African artist William Kentridge, his drawings often use a single sheet of paper, drawn with charcoal or graphite, and then photographed, redrawn, erased, photographed, redrawn, erased, photographed, as he moves around the studio in a kind of constant swirl, if you will. So you can see, when you see the film, you can see the kind of the imprints, the erasures, the palimpsest of previous versions of the drawing, because the erasing is never fully complete. It's never fully perfect, if you will. And he describes this as a counter to what he calls disremembering. And then he says that the landscape hides its history. Quote, the general nature of terrain and landscape is to appear as fact, and that I'm really interested in terrain's hiding of its own history and the correspondence that has with the way that memory works. In the same way that there's a human act of disremembering the past, both immediate and further back, that must be fought through writing, education, museums, songs, and all the other processes like drawings and models and maps too. And so I'm going to ask for your patience. This film takes a minute to kind of get started. I hope it's not too loud, but to accompany maybe a minute or so of the soundtrack, which is also wonderful. It's a Dvorak soundtrack. It's really wonderful. I'll maybe just read a short quote going to my son. That's okay. So, minus the Dvorak soundtrack, this is kind of. So Robert McFarland writes in his book Underland about Jerusalem. He says, beneath the plateau from the late 19th century, miners crawl through miles of marathon and Particulate underground field anywhere else in Earth at this time, lugging ore from a sunken reef for gold. Some of these men were migrated to the area in their thousands to work will die soon in rock falls and accidents. And more will die slowly in some cases, for breathing the rock dust down there in the dark year after year. Here the human body is largely disposable in view to corporations that own the mind and the markets that drive it. A small, unskilled tool of extraction to be replaced when it fails or wears out. The ore the men bring up is crushed and smelted into wealth and yields, lying in the pockets of shareholders in distant countries. An incredible film, about 5 or 6 minutes long. You can see it on YouTube, and you can notice, of course, the palimpsest of previous stills as they're erased and moved from scene to scene. So this is where I'm at the moment, an incomplete theory of particulate worlds. I won't read all of these. Just really to say that in thinking about this particulate theory, which is modeled in part, in heavy part by the work of Zoe Todd and Emily Desrochers-Turgeon, and I did for oil on theorizing the kerosphere. Particulates are a form of erasure, just like a sandstorm, an algae bloom, or white phosphorus falling on an olive grove in Lebanon. Particulates are also a form of resistance, countering redistribution, networks of solidarity like sediment building a continent. The images that you see on the bottom are particulate drawings that students did in the studio with the tool Atlas, where they worked with one of Santu Mofokeng's images all the way through. And so, particulate worlds can also be emancipatory and liberational. Rhodes falls and continues to fall, and to guide and foil my own work. These are some of the interlocutors that I would love this work to be in dialogue with, not the least of which obviously is Danika's own work, but Zoe Todd's work on weaponized and fossil kin, Tiffany Lethabo's theorizing about the shoal as an indeterminate liminal place, Aya Nasser's beautiful text on the geopoetics of dust, Karen Amimoto Ingersoll's seascape epistemology. As a scholar and a surfer, she argues for a seascape, not a terrestrial epistemology. Lindsay Bremner's work on monsoon, his method, and so on. And so really this project sort of muses rather on the plume, an aerosolic episteme, where perhaps matter matters less, where it becomes a shoal or a wake or a vortex, the many material and epistemic dusts between not the hollow earth, but the rich, full earth, and not the dead star, but the stellar nursery. And thank you.